On the morning of October 15th, 1890, the residents of Millbrook, Arkansas, discovered something that defied all logic. The entire Garrison family had spent the night digging 5 perfect graves in their backyard. When the sun rose, each family member climbed into their own grave and never came back out. The town sheriff found them there 3 days later, lying peacefully in holes they had carved with mathematical precision. No one could explain why they did it. No one could explain how they knew exactly how deep to dig, and no one could explain why the graves fit their bodies so perfectly, as if they had been measured for them. The Garrison family had lived in Millbrook for exactly 1 year when they decided to dig their own graves. Jacob Garrison, age 45, had moved his family from Tennessee after losing his farm to drought. His wife Eleanor was 42, a practical woman who kept detailed records of everything. Their 3 children were Mary, 19, David, 16, and little Emma, just 8 years old. They were ordinary people living an ordinary life until October 14th, 1890. That was the day they stopped being ordinary and started being dead. The first person to notice something was wrong was Mrs. Helena Crowley, the Garrison's closest neighbor. Around midnight on October 14th, she was woken by the rhythmic sound of shovels hitting earth. The sound was too regular, too persistent to be normal digging. It continued without pause through the entire night. When Sunday came, the Garrison family wasn't at church. Mrs. Crowley decided to walk over to check on them. What she found changed her understanding of what human beings were capable of. The Garrison backyard looked like a construction site. 5 rectangular holes had been carved into the earth with perfect precision. Each hole was exactly 6 feet long, 3 feet wide, and 6 feet deep. The excavated dirt was piled neatly beside each hole. When she looked into the first grave, she saw Jacob Garrison lying at the bottom, perfectly still, his hands folded across his chest. His eyes were closed, and he appeared to be sleeping peacefully. The second grave contained Eleanor. The third held Mary. The fourth, David. And the smallest grave contained little Emma, all lying as if they had simply decided to take a nap 6 feet underground. Sheriff William Torres arrived with 2 deputies and the town doctor, Marcus Reed. Dr. Reed climbed down into each grave to examine the family members. According to his official report, each member of the Garrison family was dead, but showed no signs of violence, poisoning, or disease. They had simply stopped living, apparently at the same moment, while lying in graves they had dug for themselves. The precision of the graves disturbed Sheriff Torres more than the deaths themselves. Each hole was exactly the right size for the person lying in it. Jacob's grave was longer and wider than Eleanor's, which was longer than Mary's, which was longer than David's, which was longer than little Emma's. The depths were perfectly uniform, as if someone had used surveying equipment to ensure accuracy. The most unsettling detail was the tools. The shovels, picks, and other digging implements were found arranged in a neat line beside the graves, each tool cleaned of dirt and placed with military precision. It was as if the family had completed their work and then methodically prepared to die. Sheriff Torres interviewed every resident of Millbrook. Jacob had been acting strangely for weeks, becoming obsessed with measurements. He would spend his lunch breaks pacing off distances and making detailed drawings of rectangular shapes in the dirt. Eleanor had confided that Jacob was having vivid dreams about digging holes that needed to be exactly the right size. The children had also begun exhibiting strange behaviors. Mary had stopped eating regularly, claiming she needed to be the right size for something she couldn't explain. David had been found sleepwalking in the backyard several times. Little Emma had started drawing pictures of rectangular holes with stick figures lying inside them. Dr. Reed became obsessed with understanding how the family had died. Each family member had died at the exact same moment, but there was no shared cause of death that he could identify. Their hearts had simply stopped beating simultaneously. More puzzling was the condition of their hands. Despite having dug 5 graves by hand, none of the family members showed the cuts, blisters, or calluses that such work should have produced. Their hands were soft and unmarked, as if they had never held a shovel. Using professional surveying equipment, Sheriff Torres discovered that the graves had been dug with accuracy that exceeded what any amateur could achieve. Each grave was positioned exactly 10 feet from the others, forming a perfect pentagon. The depths varied by less than an inch from 6 feet. The walls were perfectly vertical, the corners perfectly square. Professional excavators estimated that digging 5 graves to this level of precision would require at least a week of work by experienced crews using proper equipment. The Garrison family had accomplished it in a single night using only hand tools. Sheriff Torres decided that the graves should be filled in immediately after the bodies were removed for burial. He organized a work crew of 12 men to fill the graves the morning after the bodies were discovered, but the graves wouldn't stay filled. The work crew shoveled all the excavated dirt back into the holes, tamped it down, and added additional soil to ensure the ground was level. When they finished, the backyard looked normal again. The next morning, the graves were empty again. The dirt that had been shoveled into them was piled neatly beside each grave, formed into the same orderly mounds the Garrison family had created. The work crew tried again, bringing larger amounts of soil and rocks. They worked for an entire day, filling and tamping until the backyard was completely level. By morning, the graves were empty again, and the additional materials were arranged in neat piles beside the holes. Subscribe to find out what happened when the sheriff posted a guard to watch the graves overnight, because what they witnessed defied everything they thought they knew about life and death. Sheriff Torres posted Deputy James Morrison to watch the farm overnight. Morrison positioned himself with a clear view of the backyard and instructions to report any unusual activity. Deputy Morrison's report described events that challenged his understanding of reality. According to Morrison, nothing visible happened during the night. No people approached the graves. No animals disturbed the filled earth. But as he watched, the dirt in the graves began to move. It started as a slight settling, barely noticeable in the moonlight. But gradually, the filled earth began to sink, as if something beneath it was pulling it down. The dirt didn't fall or slide into the holes. It moved in an organized fashion, flowing out of the graves and reforming into the familiar neat piles. Deputy Morrison described the movement as purposeful, as if the earth itself was rearranging to restore the graves to their proper condition. By dawn, the holes were empty again, and the backyard looked exactly as it had when the Garrison family finished their digging. The investigation took a strange turn when investigators discovered legal complications preventing any changes to the property. Jacob Garrison had taken out a mortgage just 1 month before their deaths. The loan agreement contained an unusual clause stating that the property could not be sold, transferred, or significantly modified without the consent of all family members. Since all the family members were dead, the property was legally frozen. The banker recalled the meeting with Jacob as unusual. Jacob had been very specific about the mortgage terms, insisting on the clause that would prevent any changes to the property. When asked why this was important, Jacob had replied that the land had a purpose that needed to be preserved. Dr. Reed interviewed the family's previous doctor in Tennessee, hoping to learn about any conditions that might explain their behavior. Dr. Samuel Carter provided information that deepened the mystery. About 6 months before they moved to Arkansas, Jacob had brought his entire family for detailed medical examinations, claiming they needed precise measurements for insurance purposes. When Dr. Reed compared these measurements to the dimensions of the graves, he made a chilling discovery. The graves matched the body measurements from Dr. Carter's records with perfect accuracy. Each grave was exactly the right size for the person buried in it, based on measurements taken months before the family moved to Arkansas. This meant Jacob Garrison had been planning the graves long before he dug them. The family's move to Millbrook, the mortgage with its unusual restrictions, and even the medical examinations were all part of a plan that culminated in 5 people digging their own graves and lying down to die in them. The investigation expanded to Tennessee, where authorities examined the Garrison's former property. Neighbors reported that Jacob had spent considerable time in local cemeteries, measuring grave sites. Eleanor had been researching burial practices at the library. The children had been playing games involving digging holes and lying in them. Sheriff Robert Hayes discovered that Jacob had purchased surveying equipment shortly before the family moved to Arkansas. The equipment was never found among their belongings in Millbrook. The most significant discovery came from former neighbors Martha and Henry Collins. Jacob had confided about strange dreams that had been plaguing him for months. In these dreams, Jacob saw his family lying in perfectly constructed graves, peaceful and content. The dreams were so vivid that Jacob had become convinced they were prophetic visions. Eleanor had apparently shared similar dreams, as had the children. The entire family had been experiencing the same vision of their own deaths, and rather than being horrified, they had found them comforting. Jacob told Henry that the dreams made him feel his family was meant for something special. This revelation transformed the investigation into an exploration of shared psychological phenomena. Dr. Reed consulted with colleagues, but no expert had encountered a case where 5 people independently developed identical visions leading to coordinated suicide. Dr. Reed began examining the farmhouse more carefully, looking for environmental factors that might have influenced the family's behavior. Hidden beneath loose floorboards in the basement, he discovered a collection of documents that Jacob had been keeping secret. The documents included detailed plans for grave construction, surveying maps of the backyard, and most disturbing of all, a series of letters from someone claiming to represent a group called the Eternal Rest Society. According to these letters, the Eternal Rest Society was an organization dedicated to helping families achieve perfect deaths through careful planning and precise execution. The letters provided Jacob with specific instructions for preparing his family psychologically, techniques for ensuring simultaneous death without violence, and detailed specifications for grave construction. The letters claimed that families who followed the Society's methods would achieve a form of immortality, continuing to exist in a state of perfect peace beneath the earth. The graves were described not as burial sites, but as doorways to a different form of existence. The final letter was dated October 10, 1890. Just 4 days before the family dug their graves. It contained simple instructions. The time has come. Begin tonight. Remember, precision in all things ensures success. Sheriff Torres searched for other members or victims of the Eternal Rest Society, but the investigation hit dead ends. The letters bore no return address, and handwriting experts could not match the writing to any known individuals. No other law enforcement agency had encountered the organization. The mystery deepened when investigators realized that someone was still visiting the property. Fresh footprints were regularly found around the graves, always appearing overnight and following the same pattern. The prints circled each grave exactly 3 times before disappearing at the edge of the property. Deputy Morrison resumed surveillance, hoping to catch whoever was making the nightly visits. But despite watching the property for entire nights, he never saw anyone approach the graves. The footprints would appear while he was watching, materializing in the soft earth without any visible source. The footprints matched the shoe sizes of the dead Garrison family members. By December 1890, Millbrook had attracted national attention. Newspaper reporters came to write about the family that dug their own graves and the holes that wouldn't stay filled. The graves had become a source of local legend. People reported seeing figures standing in the holes at night, always the same 5 shapes arranged in peaceful positions. Several visitors attempted to spend nights at the farm. Most left before dawn, reporting overwhelming feelings of sadness and an irresistible urge to lie down in the empty graves. 2 visitors had to be physically restrained from jumping into the holes, claiming that voices from below were calling them. The town council attempted to have the property condemned, but their efforts were blocked by legal challenges from an unexpected source. A law firm representing the interests of the Eternal Rest Society. The society claimed to be the beneficiary of Jacob Garrison's will and therefore the legal owner of the property. The society's lawyers were legitimate, operating from an office in Little Rock. But when investigators tried to learn more about the organization, they encountered the same dead ends. The society appeared to exist only in legal documents and had no physical presence that anyone could locate. In March 1891, exactly 6 months after the Garrison family's death, the situation took a disturbing turn. Mrs. Helena Crowley began experiencing the same types of dreams that had plagued the Garrisons. In her dreams, she found herself standing at the edge of a rectangular hole, listening to voices promising her peace if she would climb down and lie still. Dr. Reed convinced Mrs. Crowley to leave Millbrook immediately, but 3 days after her departure, she was found dead in a hotel room in Memphis, Tennessee. She was lying on the floor in the same peaceful position as the Garrison family members. The hotel room floor beneath her body showed signs of careful excavation, as if someone had attempted to dig a grave in the wooden boards. This incident proved that the phenomenon was not limited to the Garrison property and could affect people who had merely been exposed to the graves. Dr. Reed recommended that the property be sealed off completely, but the legal battles prevented any official action. Sheriff Torres discovered that other families in Arkansas had received letters from the Eternal Rest Society. He found evidence of at least 12 families throughout the state who had been contacted between 1889 and 1891. 3 families had begun exhibiting the same behavioral patterns as the Garrisons. Despite constant surveillance, the Henderson family of Fort Smith disappeared on April 15, 1891. They were found 3 days later in their backyard, lying in perfectly constructed graves. The Martinez and Thompson families were taken into protective custody and relocated to other states, but both families died within weeks, always in the same manner. Simultaneous death while lying in rectangular depressions they had somehow excavated despite being under supervision. By summer 1891, similar cases began appearing in Tennessee, Missouri, and Louisiana. The pattern was always the same: perfect rectangular graves, simultaneous death with no apparent cause, and legal complications that prevented the graves from being filled. The investigation ended abruptly in September 1891 when Sheriff Torres received a letter from the Eternal Rest Society. "Your interference has been noted. Discontinue your investigation immediately, or you and your family will be invited to join our community." Sheriff Torres, Dr. Reed, and Deputy Morrison had all been experiencing disturbing dreams similar to those reported by the Society's victims. Faced with protecting their own families from a threat they couldn't understand, they made the decision to officially close the investigation and destroy all records related to the cases. The Garrison property remained legally frozen, protected by court orders that none of the remaining officials dared to challenge. The graves stayed empty, the nightly phenomena continued, and Millbrook gradually became a ghost town as residents moved away. The last resident left in 1895, but the Garrison graves are still there, still empty, still waiting. Modern satellite images show 5 dark rectangles in what was once the town, perfectly preserved after more than a century. The footprints still appear every morning, and on quiet nights, people driving past report hearing the sound of shovels hitting earth, rhythmic and purposeful, as if somewhere beneath the Arkansas soil, the work continues.